What you're seeing here is the sponge. I made this ahead of time, and basically it's just an extremely weak bread dough mix. I put some warm water in there, stir in about a tablespoon of sugar, add the yeast, give it a couple of moments to foam up slightly, and I add about 1 cup, maybe a cup and a half of flour, and I make a very wet mixture. And I just let that set in a warm place for probably an hour or more. You can leave it as long as you want, really, within reason, and let it foam up and get a lot of air into it, and that makes a good sponge. And then when you're ready to start making the bread, that's when you start actually adding in more flour until you get the dough consistency that you need for your actual loaf. What we're making here is just a very simple, no-knead camp bread. Nothing fancy. I may take the top off and push this down a couple of times and let it rise back up, just so the glutens have a chance to, to build up a little bit stronger. But this is not the kind of bread where you have to knead the dough and spend a lot of time on it. This is camp cooking. So this is where we actually start to add enough flour to make a proper bread dough. I just mix it to the right consistency. I don't really measure things. Like I said, this is just camp cooking. This isn't the way I would necessarily do it at home in the kitchen. But when you're out on the trail or when you're in your cabin, this is the way it generally works. So just add in enough flour, stir it in, work it in until you get that nice, fairly thick consistency of a bread dough. Now this is where I add in the salt, and if I was going to add in anything else for flavoring in this bread, if I wanted to make garlic bread or even if I wanted to put raisins or something in it, this is where I would normally do it. The sugar is in the bread from the beginning because it was a sponge, and this is just where you actually put any extra flavor in, or you just leave it as plain bread, which is what this one is. So just a few minor adjustments to get the right consistency here, and we're good to go. Time to move on to the next phase. The last time I made this on video, I put the bread directly into the Dutch oven just by greasing the Dutch oven itself, and that's awfully hard to control the heat. The heat in a wood stove is far more intense than it would be if you were doing this on a campfire. So this time I decided that I would put the dough in a small pan and put a small trivet or something to lift the pan off the bottom of the Dutch oven, just maybe 1/4 of an inch, just to isolate it just that little bit so that we don't have quite as much of a problem getting that hard burn on the bottom of the loaf. So our dough is mixed, our pan is greased. The only thing we have left to do is to put the dough in the pan, set the pan inside the Dutch oven, and set it on the heat, and hope that we pay enough attention to it that we don't burn it. Even though it's in this pan, you still have to keep a pretty close eye on it. I'm going to show you something that I do here just to make things a little bit easier. I've noticed a couple people in their videos saying that it's awfully hard to hold the camera and stir anything without spinning the bowl around. As you can see here, I've got a slightly damp kitchen towel here. You don't want it wet, just get it damp, wring it out, and make sort of a triangle out of it like you were going to make a neck kerchief or something, and set the bowl on the corner of the triangle, and then take the long tails and wrap them around the base of the bowl and pull it kind of snug so that you've got the bowl sitting on the corner of the towel and sort of nested in around with the rest of the damp towel. And that will really help hold the bowl steady, and it's a whole lot easier than struggling with it or trying to hold it with one hand. So as you'll see here, I'm going to put a couple of pieces of flat metal, approximately 1/4 of an inch thick, on the bottom of the Dutch oven, and that will just lift the pan of dough slightly off the bottom of the oven and it makes it a little bit easier to keep from scorching the bottom. It's a good idea to do that, it's even in campfire cooking, but certainly with the intensity of the wood stove, it's almost absolutely necessary. So it's time to start baking. I'm just going to rake a few coals out to the front here, separate them from the larger pile at the back, and then we'll put the Dutch oven in and we'll start the baking process. And then it's all a matter of being very careful to remember that you have to turn it, you know, every few minutes, just because that heat mass behind it could cause one side to burn. So this is where I'm going to give it another turn. I've done it a couple times already. I just take a long poker, make sure that there's enough of the coals if they've started to die down a little bit, and then I give the pot, or the Dutch oven in fact, about a half turn, and then leave it for about another 5 or 6 minutes. So I've turned it in total probably 5 times in the course of cooking this bread. So this is the moment of truth. Let's see what we ended up with. Yes, it has that hollow sound, so it's ready. Okay, so bannock is an old trail food that the voyageurs and pioneers and people have used for centuries. I can't even begin to tell you when this sort of developed. When I make this, I make it up in a bulk, and because it stores very easily, and then whenever I want to go camping, I can just either take, well, I don't usually take the bulk container, but I usually just take a few scoops of it, put it in a bag or something, a baggie, Ziploc, and take it with me. But I'm going to make a small bulk amount so that you'll get the measurements right. It's something simple. It's not, and if you want a bigger bulk, just make it 3 times or whatever. So we want 3 cups of the whole wheat unbleached flour, or actually unbleached white flour. So one, you know, again, you can add a little bit of whole wheat in here or multigrain or whatever. It'll make it a little bit heavier, and because this isn't a yeast bread, you could end up with something slightly more like a biscuit, which isn't a bad thing, just something to be aware of. Okay, this is super simple. Then for baking powder, we want 2 tablespoons of baking powder to that amount. Okay. And then we want a little bit of salt. And this is almost empty. Probably half a teaspoon. Again, it depends on how much you like. I'm not a real heavy, you need some in there, but I'm not a real fanatic for salt. That's basically it. That's your bannock recipe right there. You don't really need to do anything more to use this than just what you've got right here. Then with a little bit of water to mix in, you'll end up with a real good trail bannock. The less stuff you put in it, the longer it's going to keep. Now I know a lot of people will put powdered milk in there. The more you put it, if you start putting an egg in it and milk and all that sort of, it's not bannock anymore. You've turned it into some kind of another flatbread or something. So that, you know, that's a different story. But this basically, with say a tablespoon of sugar, which I'm going to have to get and put some in, is all you need. But when you section out an amount that you're going to use to bake that time, then you can put a squirt of oil in it. But since I'm putting a little bit of lard or bacon grease or something in the pan anyways, I don't normally bother with that. But again, it's a choice. Now there's another thing. This is very versatile, which is why I like this so much. If you're having something in the morning, you could add cinnamon to this. You could add
bits of apple or any kind of fruit that you've got, or dried fruit, even if you've reconstituted it. You can turn it into more raisins. You can turn this into more of a breakfast bun sort of a thing if you want. If it's a supper meal, then you can leave it like this. You can put whatever you want in it as you go. But this is kind of the mothership. I always talk about mothership recipes. They're my basic recipes for whatever I'm doing, and then they are also recipes that it's the same recipe, then I can just add to it without having to make a whole new, completely different batch. I shouldn't be doing this with a paper towel. This is one of those do as I say, not as I do. If you do too much of this, I get too much in there anyways. If you do too much of this with a paper towel on your cast iron, you'll get lint in it from the paper towel. And that's pretty tough to get out. You have to burn it out sometimes because it just sticks like Velcro almost. My cast iron is actually very, very smooth. I worked quite some time on that to make it nice and smooth, so it's less likely to do that, but still, not a good idea. Now here's the sugar. There's 2 tablespoons of sugar in there. So what we're going to do, I thought since I was going to do this and since I was making a video of it, I'm going to do this 2 ways. I'm going to do it the camp. If you're in camp and you've got a cabin or something where you've got a wood stove that you can work with, as we will be. So I'm going to do it in the pan for that type of thing, and then I'm going to do the trail version. So what we'll do is set that off to the side. Let's get, say, maybe a good cup of flour here. Doesn't really matter, I'm not measuring, I'm just scooping some out. So there's what, 1.25 cups maybe, something like that. Oh, that's going to take more than that for that pan. I'll put a little bit extra in. When you're on the trail, and like I said, I'll probably have a baggie of this stuff. I'll always, when I put some into my bowl to mix, I always keep a little bit back. Another thing that I'm bad at is putting too much water in too quickly and then it's runny. And if you don't have any more of the mix, believe me, taking the water back out really sucks. It's hard. As I said, coffee is the meaning of life. There's no point in living if you can't have coffee. Anyway, okay, so let's start putting a little water in here, and this is where I go and make mistakes because I never measure. I haven't the slightest idea how much water it takes per cup. I do everything like that. When I made my bread, as you might have noticed yesterday, I don't measure. I pour a bunch of flour in and I pour a bunch of the other stuff in. Now the yeast, you want to measure pretty carefully on the yeast. You want it to turn out, of course. But when it comes to adding the flour and actually making the mix, then all I want to do is just mix it until it's the consistency that I think it ought to be. If you're trying to make an exact amount for a specific sized loaf, that probably wouldn't work so well that way. But now this consistency here is probably a little bit thin, which I was saying, but it's not bad. We'll just let that set. It will get some rise just due to the fact that it's got the baking powder in there. So I'd like to give it a couple of minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the pan. Let me see if I need to adjust your view here so you can see the pan better. Okay, so let's just put this in here. Now I haven't added anything to this for extra flavoring. This is just going to be a flat out, bare bones, out in the bush with very little resources left maybe. A lot of times near the end of a trip, you'll have used up a lot of what you've got for seasonings and spices and flavorings and everything in your supplies. And once that happens, you're left making things in a pretty basic way. So this would be kind of the end of the trail bannock, because normally I like to put a little something in there. Let's just let that do its thing for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to go get it cooking. And while it's cooking, we're going to have a little bit of fun doing something else. I'm going to make a second batch, not a huge one, but maybe just 1 cup, just for demonstration purposes here. And I'll put a little water in there. Now I want this one to be a dry mix, drier than that. There's nothing wrong with the way that turned out as far as using it in a pan, but this one's going to be a little bit different. So I want this to be quite firm when it's finished. So I'm going to really spend a few moments here getting this mixed. A little bit more water. I'm going to just dribble this in a little bit at a time, because it's very, very important to have that really quite dry, firm mix, or else it simply won't work, and we'll have to just make another frying pan version, or in this case we could still mix up more flour in it. Okay, that actually was pretty close. It was closer than I thought. I didn't really have to put very much more water in it at all. Maybe a teaspoon, but if you look here, you can see that this is much drier. You can see how damp this one might be. This is much drier, and it's not going to, it's going to hold its shape a little bit more. If I pack this into a shape, it's going to hold that shape pretty decently because it is a little drier. So we're going to just let that do its thing for a minute there, and do a little rise there. You know, when you're out in the bush, whether you're camping with the family or out trapping or just hiking and taking photographs, whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't matter. It's important that you're just out there. But what I'm trying to say here is that you don't have to be, you know, not having a good time or having a rough time when you're out there. I hear people say, oh yeah, we're going to go out there, we're going to rough it and so on. I don't want to rough it. Heck, life can be rough enough as it is without, you know, at times, without having to deal with more rough and difficult situations when you're on your vacation or whatever the case may be. When I'm out there, I want to enjoy myself. I want to have a good time. I don't want to be under stress. I like to eat decent food, you know, because of the weight and preserving some foods and so on. Your variety can be a little bit reduced compared to home, of course. But by dehydrating chili and stew like I've showed, by making these different kinds of breads and having these mothership loads, you know, this could be made a little drier like this one here, and it could be, you know, flattened out and make into a kind of a basic bush pizza crust. So, you know, these things there's just endless things that you can do with this. And, you know, don't go out and rough it. Go out and be comfortable, be warm, be dry, and have a nice meal when you're done at the end of your day. It makes the whole experience so much better, and it doesn't need to be any other way than that. Okay, so the wood stove is going. I've let it burn down a little bit. I don't want it smoking hot here. I'm going to set that right there, and I'm going to take the lid, sorry, lost you there, from the Dutch oven. I'm just going to set that over there. It's not a good tight seal, but it's going to do the job. Let's just check our, yeah, we got enough, oh yeah, we got plenty of fire in there for what we want to do next. Okay, so here we have our dryer mix. It's been sitting here maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes. And we have a stick. And those two are about to go together and make a perfect match. So what's happening here, I think what I'm going to do, since I have it with me, is I'm going to put a little bit of oil on this stick, just because it's going to make things come apart easier. And I don't really want to fight with this on camera, and you know, I kind of want it to look nice. Whether you do this or not, it's not going to make the food any different. It might make it just harder to get at it. I don't want the thing to slide off, I just want it to have a bit of a release. So we're going to take our dough here. Actually, you know what, I might even just put a tiny bit of flour on that. Just to put an outside on it. Is that better? I think that's getting better. Maybe just a pinch more. I got smart and put my damp kitchen towel down on the table here. Make life a little easier. Okay, so I'm going to just set that right there. There, that's better. That's a little drier. It's not sticking my hands now. So, what I want to do is just basically roll this out into a long hot dog kind of a thing. And I'm going to just work it out. No, I'm doing it like this rather than rolling it out because I wouldn't have a roller in the bush. So I'm just going to make this, you know, kind of as realistic as I can with what it would be like if I was doing this over a campfire when I'm just out in a tarp shelter or whatever the case may be. I could spend more time on this, make it longer, thinner. Probably be better if it was longer and thinner just because it would cook faster and more evenly, but you're going to get the point here, and it's certainly going to turn out. There's no question about that. Just take this and we're going to wrap it around this stick Some of the natives long ago made it this way so often that they actually called it stick bread. Just a local term, I'm sure, but still. Okay, so we're going to take this and we're just going to roll it around the stick, quite literally. Stick bread. Just pinch that together a little bit. Now this is, when they were out in the bush and they didn't have, they might have not have had a frying pan with them, then, that's no reason not to have a decent meal. So what we do, I'm going to have to just set that down for a moment. I'm going to have to wipe my hands off so I can move the camera, and then we're going to go to the next phase. We're right close to, right above where, right here is where the frying pan is, so we can keep track of what's going on there. We've got a fire that's got some flame, but mostly it's coals. So what we're going to do is we're going to bake our bannock. Now, I should have, if this was outdoors, I'd have a longer stick, of course, probably 4 or 5 feet long, and I'd have it stuck on an angle down into the ground or into the snow or whatever and propped up there so I wouldn't have to sit and hold it like this. But this will do the job. It takes, that's kind of thick on there. I should have probably made it thinner, but this could take 15 minutes maybe. So I'm not going to keep you here watching this the whole time. And from time to time, just give it a third of a turn or whatever. And in about 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how thick the rope of dough is, the thinner you make it and the more coils you make, the faster it's going to cook because the material, the dough is thinner ropes. So we've got a good bake starting. And I'm going to have to start paying attention more carefully. It's been probably 6 or 7 minutes, maybe a tiny bit more. I'm going to have to start to think about turning that pretty soon because we don't want to scorch it. We want it just nice and golden all the way around. Okay, I'm back to finishing this by hand. And as you can see, this has already gotten away from me. What happened is I have never actually done this in the wood stove like this before. This is just something you would do over a campfire. And of course, an open campfire, the heat dissipates all the way around and up and above it and all sides, and it's not really held in any way. It's just a campfire. Where the heat of this stove, this stove has fire brick on the sides and the steel, so the heat is focused and concentrated, and it can't escape the same way as an open fire would, of course. So it's a lot more intense in there. Now I knew that. But boy, I tried to keep it up as high as I could without hitting the ceiling there and getting it sooty, but it was a bit much. So there's one little spot there. I'll show it more when I get it out, but you can see it there. That's maybe 1/5 of the diameter, maybe a little bit more. But I just scraped it a little bit to check it. It's really just on the surface. So I haven't lost anything to speak of, but that just shows you how hot these darn wood stoves go. So if you were doing this on a campfire, it would be a lot easier, and I would have a little bit more room. I would be able to lift it up higher above the flame to regulate the temperature a little bit. Here, if I was going to do this again, and I probably won't, I would probably have it outside the door like this, not even in the stove as it was, but right out flush with the door maybe, and that would give you some control a little bit more over the heat and maybe move it back in. But it's a learning experience for me as well, because like I said, when you've got a stove you wouldn't normally be doing this. This is more of a trail thing. So as soon as this is done, and it's pretty darn close. Oh yeah, it's got that nice hollow sound. I think I'm going to take this off and be done with it. So I'm going to close the door and I'll bring you back. And when I do, we'll check again on the one on the top, and it should be moving along better after this door is closed. Well, let's see how this is doing. Now what I've done is flip it over. So that's actually the bottom. You can see it's just got that nice golden color. And I'm pretty sure it's cooked completely through, but the top didn't really have any color. So I flipped it over just to get just a little bit of sort of a toasty look to it. That looks actually pretty darn good. Okay. Well, there it is. Well, that's not too bad. Not too bad. Okay, so we know what the bannoc's like. We know we've got a little burnt spot on there. That's a shame. This is our other bannock done on the top, and as we can see, we've got that beautiful golden toast color. That's looking pretty good. It's still actually quite warm, so I'm going to put that back down. And then this is our loaf of bread, and as you can see, it's just nice all the way around. No burns or anything. That turned out really nicely. So now the only thing left to do is to go upstairs, get a little bit of butter, put it on some of this nice warm bread, and give it a taste test. Thank you all for joining me. As you know, I really appreciate it. I look forward to the comments. I hope everyone has a great week. We'll see you all down the trail.